Hey, you, eyes on me. Ignore the title for a second and just walk with me on this. But before that, let's just collectively scream at the fact that Chapter 3 and 4 of Deltarune are finally out, aight? 1, 2, 3. Hey there, long time no see! In essay format. No kidding here, I've been going back and forth on whether I should do another one of those, as frankly, the way I phrased myself in the Sans video is making me cry a bit. But I really thought it'd be cool to have an excuse to talk about Deltarune for a second, cause my god, what a ride it was. If you haven't figured it out by now, this whole video will have both Undertale and Deltarune spoilers, so if you're still in the dark about it, now's the time to dip. So, hindsight is 2020, or 2025 I guess in this case, but the Roaring Knight making their debut in Chapter 3 already actually makes more sense than I initially realized. I mean, think about it, the only two characters even acknowledging the Knight are King and Queen, with Spamton and Sham also bringing them up, but it's also very missable dialogues. And even when Queen emphasizes the Knight the most, no one in the Fun Gang actually gave that detail any mind. Like, sure, Ralsei definitely knew about them, but he also just didn't say anything about it, and Susie and the rest of the Lightners were so wrapped up with Queen's shenanigans, no one really, as politely as I can put it, gave a fuck about the Knight at all. While there have been many people making videos about the identity of the Knight, I think we were all so hyper-focused on the mystery behind it that we all collectively forgot what was actually presented to us in terms of story structure. So yeah, the main antagonist kinda had to be established early on, otherwise it would have just been Chapter 2 for another 5 times. It's actually funny in retrospect how we saw Chapter 2 as a template for the whole game. Remember how we all assumed Toriel would have a major role in Chapter 3? Boy, that sure went down the drain fast. I think this goes together with the whole thing about Deltarune almost refusing to have Undertale's original cast to really be as involved into Deltarune's narrative. And frankly, to me, I think that's not that bad. After all, Deltarune, while having many things in common with Undertale, is still its own story. It wanting to focus on Chris, Susie, and Ralsei more is completely natural. The only characters that would have more to do with it would obviously be the Dreamers, since they are directly tied to Chris. I mean, hell, in my Sans video I even said that anything to do with him would be in the background, so there is no way he would get any— I think that's it. Wouldn't it be really funny if Sans was in the house now? That'd be so fucking funny. Only because of the song showing up, okay? So, do you mind if I— Chris? Yeah! So, things have certainly happened. Ladies and germs, let me make a case on how Deltarune kinda relates back to Undertale and why the Jitterbug scene is actually more significant than you might think. To clarify, this video isn't just about the scene, but how it kinda jump-started a whole lot of things I had thought about and how it basically confirmed the theory I had in my mind. I also, again, want to make it clear that this isn't about making Deltarune Undertale 2, or sequel, or prequel, or whatever. Well, the latter may have some points, but let's ignore that for just a second. It actually has more to do with a very specific way I wanted Deltarune to be related with Undertale. That being that Deltarune would provide context to things within Undertale. Nothing direct or spoken out loud, but that would give you some food for thought about something that maybe wasn't clear before, or makes you look at something in a new light. Don't know what I'm talking about? Great, then I have an excuse to ramble for 30 minutes. I am grateful to Deltarune for a lot of things, but if there's one thing that I was the happiest about, is Chapter 4 giving me the perfect example of what I mean. Gerson. Gerson has always been a very beloved side character in Undertale. Even if he wasn't your favorite character, he provided some interesting insights to the overall lore in the story. He is, also, the one who explains to you the prophecy of the Deltarune. Fitting, eh? If you backtrack to him after defeating Azrael, you'll also get some extra tidbits about his past, mainly that he is old enough to have fought in the war between humans and monsters, known as the Hammer of Justice. It's also here and in the phone call with Undyne around his shop that you learn about her and Gerson's relationship as student and mentor. This establishes the idea that Undyne was not just trained by Asgore as initially thought, but that she was trained by an actual legend. Despite those being really cool details, you never actually see Gerson in action, nor any interaction between him and Undyne. Not to mention how missable these little extra dialogues are. Sure, he's a badass and a degenerate, but it doesn't really go further than that. While many Gerson fans were probably fine with just this little to base whole comics and headcanons on, Deltarune did something phenomenal with Gerson. Even though the trope of the old cuckoo is wiser than first expected that can also whoop your ass isn't exactly new, it works perfectly for the story presented. Susie gets so excited about how she's part of the prophecy, a predetermined fate she seemingly is a part of, that it's natural to be a bit bummed that she's at the same time shoved into a category of fighter. One who only hurts with an axe, who couldn't possibly learn healing magic as good as Ralsei. So, of course, it makes sense for Gerson to be the one to basically say screw fate and write her own story. That basically summarizes their whole relationship, but it doesn't end just there. If you solve the golden piano puzzle, you get the chance to fight Gerson. And with you, I mean Susie and Susie alone. This fight honestly could have its own video, as it is just an incredible demonstration of the chapter's themes and also a beautiful mixture of Gerson's, but also Undyne's mantra. The Undyne motifs don't get overlooked. Many people freaked out when seeing the green soul make its return, and very fitting for this fight as well. Not only do we finally see Gerson in his glorious warrior self and magnificent ponytail, but we also get motifs of Spear of Justice and battle against a true hero in the battle music, which gives us a direct connection back to Undyne. And while Susie is absolutely her own character that has her own journey to make, you'd be crazy to say she doesn't have a lot in common with Undertale's Undyne to a certain degree. Because of that, the dynamic Susie and Gerson have as mentor and mentee, is that a word? Open Office isn't correcting me, so I assume it is. Anyway, with the dynamic they present here, it indirectly gives you a small window of what Undyne and Gerson's relationship was like in Undertale, from her defiance of fate and making her own path, like in her Undyne fight, to carrying over the justice motive in her own way. It also informs you a lot on Undyne, as we can now say pretty confidently that she's carrying on Gerson's torch, just like Susie is when accepting the axe. Hell, Gerson even makes a reference to how Susie reminds him of Undyne, or more, the dragon she's definitely connected to, in Lord of the Hammer. Also, unrelated, but can I just say how much I love the Hammer of Justice? Not only combining all the Undyne motifs, but also the instrumentation. Can you recall the last time you heard a jaw harp in a track like this? Cause I can't. And the freedom motif sneaking in there as a signifier on Gerson's personal sense of freedom by not abiding by any script and doing his own thing, like, delicious. So with this example, I hope you can understand better as to what I mean with Deltarune kinda relating back to Undertale. It's nothing direct or a clear-cut reference, but something that makes certain aspects of Undertale much richer with Deltarune's implications on things, specifically its characters. One thing that I'm sure people have talked about already is how the Undertale cast provide a bit of an insight how much the underground had affected them, and how the absence of it has changed these characters drastically. It almost makes them feel one-dimensional with the lack of baggage they used to carry, when in reality they haven't really changed that much. It just feels more simplified due to the lack of conflict they used to have, and also, as mentioned, the story of Deltarune having little to do with them individually. Alphys is still very anxiety-ridden, but not to the same degree as she was in Undertale. I mean, she's willingly teaching high school students, that is bound to be stressful as hell. She has a bit of a connection with Toriel, but more as a work colleague it seems. She's a bit more acquainted with Asgore, but we haven't really seen them interact much either, so right now she just feels like the archetypical awkward teacher. Undyne seems to not have been close to Gerson or Asgore even, so that sense of justice and pride she's known for in Undertale isn't really there, as if it just wasn't taught to her, and it feels more like her wanting to use her position as a cop to beat up criminals and do whatever she wants with the authority she was granted to do so. Evidently from Chapter 3's ending, she will get some importance again, but that's really all there is to her aside the subplot with her and Alphys' beginning relationship. Napstablook is basically the same as in Undertale, meanwhile Mad Dummy and Mettaton are stuck at home, both showing what they were most likely like before they were able to transition into their respective forms. Mettaton in particular is really saddening, as he's clearly too unhappy with who he is that the idea of going outside makes him so miserable. He's clearly lacking that joy of gender affirmation he got from the robot body Alphys had built for him. If you somehow didn't realize Mettaton was trans until now, there you go, I'm not dewokifying terms for this. And let's not even get into the absolute tragedy that is the continuous absence of Papyrus. Whatever is going on with him, it almost creates a direct mirror to his Undertale presence. Pacifist doesn't happen without him and his butting into businesses he has no right to be in. Yet in Deltarune, he hasn't even left his house. At this point, you gotta question if Papyrus even exists in Deltarune. Busy my ass, I'm onto you, Toby. Let's now go over Asgore, as frankly his personality in Deltarune is a little odd to me. If I had to give Toby any criticism, it's making Asgore way too interesting at the end of the neutral route, only for him to be made the butt of the joke as the ex-husband in the pacifist ending. It's been a little off to me ever since I rejoined the fandom and had some time to think about it. I wanted to quickly bring this up as I don't want to come off as me dick-riding on Toby's writing, and that there are occasional problems with them. And even more unfortunately for me, it seems to have been planned out from the beginning. Now, obviously, the main difference between the two variations is that Undertale Asgore can acknowledge how far his mistake has gotten, that he'd be fine to just be friends with Toriel. Deltarune Asgore, however, is clinging to dear life to preserve the marriage. By the time of writing this, we still don't know what exactly caused the divorce. It might have to do with Des's disappearance and his resignation of the police force, but we can probably deduce with confidence that it's not these 6 dead humans after declaring war kind of baggage. Not that divorce needs such a drastic reason, but the way it's presented, Asgore seems to not believe himself to be at fault in it, as he did in Undertale, thus resorting to very unhealthy approaches to fix the marriage somehow. Believe it or not though, it's not actually that out of character. Even though he regretted declaring war after Toriel left, he still went on with the plan despite having had the power to stop it as a king right then and there before it escalated too far. Yes, he ended up being a coward just waiting it out, but he still stuck with it instead of stopping it altogether. It may have been to preserve his people's hopes, but he still stuck to his aggressive passivity. Asgore, as much sympathy as I have for the guy, has a tendency to refuse to let go or back down from things, whether it's a badly thought out revenge on humanity or the idea he could fix his relationship with Toriel. And we see this stubbornness in full force in Deltarune. Even if I don't particularly like it in terms of writing, it still tracks. Now, on to Toriel. Toriel has been, for a lack of a better word, been catching strays. I can't comment on whether or not the scene was well handled with the Jitterbug, as I never had parents like this, and I understand that it hit very close to home to some people, so I don't fault anyone for having had a very negative reaction towards it. That being said, I think a scene like this was kind of necessary. Whether well executed or not, it actually pointed fingers at Toriel directly, what was only implied up until now, which is Toriel's tendency to be ignorant and her constant avoidance. We have her not really do anything about Chris's bullying, avoid the human monster talk by giving Chris a hornband as like a band-aid, her fully knowing Chris owns a knife and not being concerned about that whatsoever, which could all be brushed off as her knowing Chris so well she trusts him or whatever bullshit you can come up with. But when there is an actual blood stain in the room, you start to finally raise an eyebrow. There's also the whole thing about the divorce just straight up not being talked about with her. And if she was by herself, then like good for her, enjoy that single life, but she has kids. Kids that are affected by it and that need to be considered to have a talk with. Not on whether a divorce should happen, that is still on the parents, but to talk it out on what it means, check up on the kids' well-being, and figure out co-parenting if possible and safe. It also doesn't help that her absence in chapter 3 makes a lot of sense if you sit down and think about it more. We have a whole dark world that reflects Chris's feelings and turmoil, their issues that have been caused by Des's disappearance, and, more importantly for this, their divorce. And it is the one where Toriel has her sleeping the entire time. Yes, she was put to sleep on purpose and maybe even by Chris themselves, but from a metaphorical perspective, it's a little concerning, isn't it? There's also the contrast between losing the night and winning to it. Toriel is soundly asleep if you just take the L, but fighting back and actively facing the issue, aka the fight, has her have a nightmare. Like, you could not make her issues any more obvious. Except Toby did in fact do that. The Jitterbug scene has her confirmed to have locked out Chris and Susie without ever telling them that choir practice was cancelled after having clearly seen someone slashing a car tires at night, not asking about where the hell her kid is past midnight, and, of course, her drinking fit. That in particular struck a nerve in many people that painted Toriel in a very, very bad light. Not to mention that even when Chris finally does get home, she and Sans do not even think about toning it down with the music, making it even harder for them to fall asleep. To put it bluntly, Toriel fucked up bad and is a bad parent for this. I wouldn't say it makes her a completely bad person or a bad mother, but it doesn't make her a good one either. Hey there, Editing Ryan here. I want to clarify that my point isn't that Toriel was never a good mother. Of course she is. We see this with Susie and also how Toriel would do anything for Chris. She loves them dearly. What I just tried to argue is that she isn't perfect and her avoidance of difficult subjects tends to make her not as attentive, which is how she makes these mistakes. It's also likely that this is a one-time thing, which is why it is such a shock to see her this irresponsible. I want to make it clear that I love Toriel and that this isn't supposed to put her in a bad light, just to bring up traits that have been somewhat neglected. I don't think a woman making one mistake or have her act less than perfect one time makes her a bad person altogether or abusive. Back to the regular script. I'll touch up on my thoughts on the scene a bit more as we keep going, but hold on a second. Isn't this really strange? Toriel Undertale, the goat who immediately regrets leaving Frisk alone and tries so badly to keep them in the ruins, would never be this irresponsible with her own children, would she? Well, actually, the answer may shock you, as I think the Jitterbug is a perfect representation on what went wrong with Kara. Again, not directly, but it provides you with context. I don't want to make it sound like Kara's issues were necessarily her fault, but I think what Deltarune provides is an insight on what Toriel was like as a parent towards Kara, that being very loving, but not as attentive as we may have thought. Whatever Kara had against humanity, it is more than obvious that neither Toriel nor Asgore really helped them through this issue. Asgore probably went straight to calling them the hopes of monster kind to unite both races, just like he immediately made Chris the flower messenger for him, and Toriel only provided general motherly care and likely tried her hardest to now make them think about their time on the surface. She might have tried to deflect any questions Kara might have had that would have them explain their emotional state that Toriel brushed over. Thinking that would solve it, not realizing that this just gave room for Kara's darkness to still fester in them. No, this is not a Kara's evil topic, nor is it an everything is Toriel's fault thing. People are complex. But you can see how things didn't really pan out with that method of parenting, and with that they see their children die, leaving Asgore and Toriel to grieve and succumb to their worst traits. Asgore declaring war without much thought in his anger, and Toriel to isolate herself from the rest of the underground. Okay, so I don't know where else to put this, but I'ma just put it out there. Toriel's main flaw in this whole situation was to not protect the humans outside of the ruins and weaponizing her avoidance as a means for overprotection. Another point you can make is her not trying to stick by her people within the community to figure out how to stop Asgore. Her mistake was not leaving Asgore, nor is she directly responsible for the humans' deaths. We don't know how the monarchy works in Undertale, so there is a chance Asgore as the male king had more power than her, but this is the wokest game you're ever gonna play, so you could argue against that. But even with that, imagine you just lost your child and the next thing your husband does is declare to kill any human that falls down the underground, just like Kara to be killed on sight. Not to mention how a good majority, indicative of the new home lorddom, were completely on board and even excited about it. Toriel very likely did not just feel disgusted by Asgore, but also the rest of her people that made her not want to have anything to do with it. And we know from the neutral endings that people can and will overthrow their monarch if they are in disagreement over policy. So what the fuck was she gonna do about it for what, 2 weeks maybe?
But she could have comforted and cooled down Asgore.
Motherfucker, what about her? Asgore should have grieved with her. He pulled the trigger. Why the fuck would she feel responsible for his sorry ass to commit to a really awful plan that directly disrespects one of their dead children? Her leaving should have been a sign for him to stop. Her mistake is in how she handled her own flaws, not Asgore's. Toriel is deeply flawed in both games, but none of them make them worse than Asgore. She is not responsible for his mistakes! Okay, misogyny section over. Back to Toriel's avoidance. What I think Deltarune provides is a look at how she used to handle her parenting and how in Undertale she tried to overcorrect her behavior. Her priority now lied in making sure Frisk would not leave her sight, but the bad habit still carries over after leaving Frisk alone for a while. At that moment, she tries her hardest to avoid the topic of Frisk going home, only to be pushed to destroy the ruins exit. Even though her avoidance is still present, it's now utilized for her to be overprotective instead of actively neglectful. It's a result of failing not just Kara, but also the other humans that she couldn't get to stay. This is how the lack of this baggage in Deltarune shows how Toriel is without it. how the tragedy transformed her in Undertale and gives us a much sadder but also deeper understanding for why Toriel is the way she is. It gives us a new perspective on her that humanizes a woman who tried to mend her mistakes but ended up going for something that was just as unhealthy. And I genuinely hope that if not in chapter 5, then in 6 for her to have a healthier realization in Deltarune to do better in the right way. You can tell these two versions are much more connected also with Toriel's relationship with alcohol. While it was never in the main game, the alarm clock provided Toriel with the same issue. She's not an alcoholic per se, that has a specific medical connotation to it, but she does have a tendency to become very irresponsible whenever she is involved with it. And her drinking when she's alone in the ruins shows her problem with it even further. It is a constant and hopefully a problem that gets addressed soon. Anyway, with that whole section out the way, you may have noticed the lack of discussion around Sans. Well, I left him for last as A, he is my favorite with Papyrus, though for obvious reasons I can't include him into this, and B, he is by far the biggest surprise for me in terms of the implications Deltarune carries for Undertale. And I'm only mildly referring to the theory that Deltarune and Undertale Sans are the same person. If any of the characters suffered the most under the simplification due to lack of baggage, it is Sans. A lot of stuff that made Sans so fascinating in Undertale are the implied mysteries with him. Where is he from? What happened to the place he can't go back to? Why can he teleport or stop time, depending on your headcanon? How much knowledge does he have over resets? His connection to alphas? Why are his blasters labeled Gaster Blasters? How is he able to use karma in battle? And, of course, why on earth can he fucking bleed? All of these elements point to Sans having a much richer and tragic backstory that we just don't get to see, which is why he feels a little empty in the existing chapters of Deltarune. With that lack of seriousness, depression, and existentialism that made him so relatable, all he's really left with is his prankster shtick. It's not out of character, we know he loves doing that shit, and without any serious undertones, it makes sense for him to focus on that. So all that's really left as character traits right now are him taking the piss with Susie, and, of course, the I befriended your mom last night. Side tangent, how many of you did not pick up on this being a genuine joke? Like, yes, he puts befriended in quotations, but then immediately talks about how he became friends with her and had a chat. I don't think people realize that the innuendo is part of the joke, as in it actually him being literal about it. It's a your mom joke, he did not bang Toriel. You can see the scene of Chris trying to cover the ears from the music as an allegory for it of sorts, but it's not literal. I found a joke funny and you all ruined it for me, man. So having only pranks and a your mom joke be your only character traits is a massive downgrade from the Sans that had a tight grip on Tumblr in 2016. It's kind of the reason I thought he wasn't gonna contribute much to the main narrative of Deltarune, as I could not think of how in the world he would get involved. And before I knew it, I was baseball slapped in the face. Yeah! Before getting into that, there is actually another thing I'd like to point out. It's sort of been noted, but I haven't seen much discussion around it personally, so I think it's time we address another elephant in the room. Sans' lack of social skills. Yes, you heard me. A very well-known trait of Sans Undertale is his incredible skill at reading expressions so dead accurately he can tell how often you have died to him. A point I brought up in the Sans video to indicate how he caught you lacking at the diner. Side note, I do know he said something else if you don't die a single time in Undertale, I just did not feel the need to mention it then. But that's not the only demonstration of social awareness. We know from said diner and also at Grillby's that Sans knows when to be serious and when he can joke around. And I'm not just referring to the Echo Flower talk, he knows when he can be funny and when he wants to have a genuine talk about Papyrus. In Snowden, he refocuses onto Papyrus if he realizes that you are being a dick to his brother, so Pap at least has somewhat of a good time. At the diner, he tells you how he stopped making jokes the instant he could tell something was wrong with Toriel's laughter. And whether or not you believe in my theory that the promise was more of an excuse for him to not care, the fact is he tried to comfort her and reassure that things were going to be okay. Then there's Judgment Hall, where he changes his mood depending on what you did. If you kill a lot but leave Papyrus alive, his dark humor varies in intensity, meanwhile killing Papyrus is very cold, no real jokes, and just a straight call-out with no sugarcoating. And then there's the pacifist judgment, one where he could easily have been more humorous but instead hung on to the theme of hope, not disrespecting your efforts of doing good at all and commending you for sticking it out. Fact is, the guy knows how to socialize perfectly. So why, in Deltarune, is he fumbling so hard with it? Laugh at the joke all you want, but telling a kid you just met a your mom joke is pretty weird, even for a dickhead like Sans. At the grocery store when Asgore shows up, he faces away and isn't even trying to roll with it, and while it is something that most of us would do here as well, for Sans, it feels uncharacteristically embarrassed. Sure, you could argue that it's because he just met Asgore recently, but we're talking about the guy who apparently just walked into Grillby's one day asking for the usual when it was his first time there. You'd think he'd know how to navigate an awkward joke like that. Although the alternative that he had to turn around because he genuinely found ex-husband that fucking funny is hilarious. This point might be mute, but I always felt this conversation with Asgore afterwards felt weirdly awkward, even for Sans. It's not the kind of confidence that we're used to. I might be grasping at straws with this one, but I swear this dialogue feels so unlike him. There's also this exchange with him if you decide to give him Undine's chocolates. When I saw this for the first time, I could not believe it. He deadass needed a minute to collect himself there. He's so taken aback by this action, it takes him a solid few seconds to get what's going on there. That is the most awkward I have ever seen canon Sans. Then there's the thing with Papyrus. Now, Sans does deal with Papyrus's kinda childish side, with things like the bedtime stories, but he's held enough respect for Papyrus to just kinda let him discover what to do whatever. In Deltarune, however, he backpedals on the hangout the very next day, as if he realized having him hang out with a random stranger alone wasn't as good of an idea, even if it made for a fun joke. It might be on Papyrus, of course, but could it also be likely that he didn't think it through? Maybe he misjudged how willing Papyrus actually was to just meet anybody to give him company. That, too, feels weirdly out of character for him. Speaking of out of character, let's now circle back to the Jitterbug scene. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but Sans Deltarune has kinda become public enemy number 1 over the scene. And while I think some of it is exaggerated greatly, you can definitely understand why. Even though Toriel wasn't being very responsible, she did ask Chris retroactively if Susie was alright, to which Sans just comments that she'll be fine and goes back to turn on the music and resume to dance. Like, Mr. That's the expression of someone who's died twice in a row, cannot tell that Susie was clearly upset and Toriel genuinely worried? Of course he's gonna come off as a dick. We know from Undertale he could have read the room perfectly and yet seems to intentionally brush it off. Why? Well, this is where we get into a bit of theory territory. As said, Deltarune seems to provide context to how the circumstances have changed them as people on Undertale, and what they would be like without any of that baggage or character development. So, with that in mind, I have 2 ideas for why Sans acts so different. One is the idea that Sans may have had an experience, whether it be at a lab or his previous home or whatever it could be, where he learned to read social cues and moods as a survival tactic. Like, if he previously failed to identify an anomaly, that resulted in him wanting to make sure that never happens again and training his awareness to the max. So he'd always be on top of things. That would have to be before he gave up on it a long time ago. That, or, possibility 2, the idea that Sans is fundamentally younger in Deltarune. How much younger I could not tell you, but enough to notice a clear difference in maturity. Like, let's say his very late 20s to early 30s. If you think that's too old to be immature, hi, I'm almost 27, I can tell you nobody knows what the fuck we're doing here. How old he is exactly can be debated. What is important to explain why I think so is that skill comes from experience. And while some people are more naturally socially skilled, to make it as fantastically accurate as Sans is, there needs to have been quite a life to get it this perfectly. I'm not exactly saying only mature people know how to read the room, I am autistic after all, but even neurotypicals need a lot of socializing to really pick up on things you otherwise wouldn't, and that comes with time and practice. For this idea to work, of course, it would need to be confirmed that Sans Deltarune will become Sans Undertale at some point. After all, Deltarune's timeline seems to show everyone older than they were back in Undertale. That theory hinges a lot on that, of course, but either possibility shows basically the start of Sans' character, and it makes you really curious what it is that had him need to learn to be more socially aware. What event would have needed to transpire for him to need to read people perfectly? What burned him so bad that this uncertainty had him learn this skill in the first place? And what could happen in Deltarune to give a glimpse of what may have happened in Undertale? I thought whatever would be Sans' deal would be discovered by looking around his house or something in Chapter 7 that you wouldn't be able to do without like 8 other convoluted secrets or whatever. Something really difficult to put together on a first playthrough basically. But with how he is now involved with Toriel and the divorce, he might actually get the Birdly treatment, as in a side character getting a big character development as a subplot. Nothing to overshadow the main narrative of course, but still very significant. I can't tell you what exactly the plot with him will be like. All I know is that it threw all my assumptions, and I didn't even have that many, out the window like papyrus. Because if Sans can get more connected through Toriel, maybe Alphys can get so too for Asgore. Maybe not in the same way, but certainly something. Which would also have to bring an Undyne and hell, maybe Domino into Mettaton being brought in as well. I want to reiterate again that it's not about making Deltarune just Undertale 2. But about how Deltarune provides more context for these characters, and now that Sans opened the door for more possibilities, can you blame me for being a little excited how it changes how I view a game I cherished for 10 years? I'd like to use this final section as a moment to talk about the Jitterbug scene a little bit. The only thing I would personally change about it is maybe fading over the music with something more neutral to indicate the seriousness of it. Realistically, of course, you just hear the vinyl, but in media like this, music is everything. And I think it would have helped conveying the conflicting emotions better if the music reflected that mood. Either way, I think what happened is Toriel venting to Sans about her issues with Asgore, school, the holidays, Chris, etc. Thus, he might have thought that having fun drinking could cheer her up, and that in his drunken stupor, he focused on that original thought instead of recognizing an issue with the scene. My point is that since he probably only has Toriel's perspective on things, he might not actually be aware that he's enabling her bad behavior of avoidance and irresponsibility. And yes, I think he was drunk too. He seems like the kind of guy who would be really good at hiding his drunkenness. Like, look at him move. You will never see that of him while sober. Like, come on. Not to absolve him from his crummy behavior, but considering the thoughtfulness Sans Undertale had, I can't help but wonder if this is just a combination of unfortunate coincidences. Another point I'd like to bring up is the whole discussion around Toriel. Now, I will be very upfront with you. I love Toriel as a ship. I think the chemistry can work platonically just as well as romantically. I understand the reasons people have for disliking it, and this isn't me trying to put those down, but I also have my own reasonings for why it works for me instead. You can dislike it. Unlike Chris, you have free will, just like I have free will to like it instead. I just don't think it's as bad as some people describe it as. Like, trust me, this is not remotely close to the worst ship in existence. That being said, I'd like to provide some comfort for Toriel haters. I fully believe that the game is framing the two being read as romantic intentionally. The grocery shop scene giving you Toriel and Sans' connection is immediately followed up with Asgore attempting at flirting, and also right after Toriel leaves Asgore again at the church, it's no coincidence that next time we see them, it's when dancing into the night. If Sans was literally any original character, most people would have read this as romantic, let's be real here. However, exactly because it's with Sans, the setup for it to turn out to be platonic in the end feels more likely. I didn't bring up the your mom joke for nothing. He is being literal about the befriending, and I think that's gonna be the punchline of it all. I could even see how Toriel could get upset at Asgore only finally respecting Toriel's boundaries after thinking she's involved with another man again and not actually in respect to her personhood. I don't know, I never expected a plotline like that to be used for Deltarune, much less with Sans, but I want to trust that Toby knows what he's doing. I usually don't like stories like this, so I can't really tell you how well that's gonna go. But I personally like the little Toriel hints I got, and hey, I'm not gonna pretend my fangirl ass isn't at least a little happy over Sans having plot relevance again. Thank you for watching, I can't wait to see what Chapter 5 has in store, and